What is up? And welcome to a very special presentation of No Pun Intended. This, I believe, I've been with the show for about 3 years now. More than that, even more than that. I don't even know, but I think this might be our first ever fantasy reaction show. So I am your host, Ryan Weisse, and we are here to react to Aaron Rodgers finally being traded to the New York Jets. Before we jump in, I'm going to go ahead and let my co-hosts for tonight's wonderful look at the fantasy value affected introduce themselves, starting with Joel Wirth. Joel, introduce yourself. Tell people who you
are. Thanks, Ryan. I'm Joel Wirth, the Joel Wirth on Twitter. Club Dynasty's resident Packer fan. So this has been a day I've been waiting for quite a while. I think we can officially call April 24th Jordan Love Day going forward. It's a day I've been looking forward to. So happy to see it finally go down and excited for the package they got.
Yeah, and then I'm joined tonight by another part of Club Dynasty, Michael Sicoli, who was brought in to eventually be hosting a show with you, Joel. Michael, how are you?
Oh, I'm just great. And I wasn't sure if I was with Joel or Jordan Love season, as his byline says here.
Yeah, that's why I figured we better start with intro, since my guy is so excited he doesn't even have his name there anymore. So like Ryan said, starting up a Dynasty show here with Club Fantasy real shortly. More on that obviously to come. Yeah. But just what a deal. What an exciting time. I'm sitting in the middle of one of my classes, getting the notification on my Apple Watch telling me that big trade's gone down, and I'm just trying to keep a straight face knowing that the mock draft I released this morning has been smashed to smithereens, and I immediately had to redo half of it within the last hour. So exactly,
that was a lot of fun.
What do you know? Aaron Rodgers, the season hasn't even started yet, and Aaron Rodgers is ruining things for people.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where
and this is really 3 drafts in a row that he has kind of dominated the conversation. So.
Yeah, but the move finally happened. So let's get started with the compensation. So the Jets are walking away with Aaron Rodgers, obviously. They moved back to the number 15 pick. They are picking up the number 170, which is a 5th round pick this year. The Packers are moving up to 13, so a two pick increase in the first round. They are picking up number 42, which is a 2nd rounder this year, a 6th rounder this year, and then a conditional 2nd round that can become a 1st if Rodgers plays 65% of the plays next year. So let's start with the compensation before we get into the fantasy impact. Michael, how do you feel each team did in this? Is there a clear winner?
If I had to pick one, it's very clearly the Packers for me. I think the Packers got a tremendous haul for a player that has publicly stated that he has no indication, no want to play for this franchise again. So you have a net zero on that side. You have a guy that said, I'm not going to play with you. And you're able to turn a 1st round pick, move up a couple of spots ahead and ahead of the Patriots, which I think is a very telling move right there for a team that a lot of people, including myself, mocked JSN to, Jackson Smith-Njigba, to the Patriots. I think the Packers are looking at him. I'm just saying that at 13. Okay. I had to change that pick. But I think it makes a lot of sense to me. And the Jets they committed themselves for this. They said they wanted Rodgers. When you publicly say this, they had to get him. So it's the price they had to pay, but I think the Packers did pretty well to get a respectable haul.
Yeah, the common saying was that the Jets were bidding against themselves, Joel. So I can't imagine we've discussed it before the show. I don't have to build any suspense with this. Joel, you're excited about how all this went down. So
I am, yeah. I early in the process, I said I would have been happy just getting a 2nd back, just a straight 2nd round pick this year. I think would have been good when you consider he's 39 years old. His play significantly decreased last year. The size of his contract, to get anything more than that, I think, is a win for the Packers. If you look at the picks they got this year, all the pick moving around, it equals, if you go by trade chart, it equals around the 4th or 5th pick of the 2nd round. So to get an early 2nd is very nice. And then I think the key part is that they get basically a 24 first, assuming he plays 65% of the snaps. There's no retirement condition, no playoff condition. Just him playing to get that into a 24 first. That's a huge haul and like you said, the Jets were, I don't know if they were bidding against themselves. I think there were a couple teams that could have gotten in on it, maybe New England, maybe Tennessee, but that would have been, you never know. And there was always the nuclear option with Rodgers, is that he could have retired unretired and then just completely nuked their cap and just completely screwed them, forced them to basically either trade him for nothing or drop a bunch of players that they didn't want to. So that takes that off the table. it's a big relief on my end. And obviously, it probably has to be for the Packers front office as well.
Absolutely. So before we get into the fantasy aspects, I just want to give a shout out to another fellow Club Fantasy member, Andrew Elmquist, who kind of gave us the idea to do this fantasy reaction show. And I'm pretty sure it's our first ever fantasy reaction show. And then he immediately wasn't able to do the show tonight. So Andrew, we miss you, buddy. Wish you could have been with us, but maybe it's a great idea. It's something that's going to progress further in the future. So as I mentioned, this show is going to be about the fantasy value. It's the fantasy football reaction to this trade. Let's start with the team that Aaron Rodgers is going to play for. Michael, who is the biggest winner on the New York Jets from this Aaron Rodgers trade?
The easiest answer has to be Garrett Wilson. I mean, it's the obvious answer. It's the easy one. And there's reason for it. I mean, we're talking about a fancy wide receiver that was one of the best out there as a rookie, coming into a very difficult situation with poor quarterback play. You know, he caught passes from Zach Wilson. He caught passes from Chris Streveler, from Mike White, Joe Flacco. Those are all terrible names, and there's 4 of them there. Most likely, you don't want to have more than one of those. So it's a huge upgrade. I believe 19% of Zach Wilson's targets that went to Garrett Wilson were uncatchable. So you add the Aaron Rodgers into that factor, it's a huge boost for him. And I think the other winner, just to quickly throw it out there, I mean, Alan Lazard, you know, it was a big contract that he signed. We were kind of not sure what to expect from
Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, no, and I hope we all do. But it's just something that, you know, Alan Lazard becomes a beneficiary because he has this familiarity with Rodgers. He has a familiarity with the system with Nathaniel Hackett. It just all makes sense. And I mean, what we were expecting to happen did happen, and therefore we can project forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Same sentiments there, Joel. Do you think it's definitely Garrett Wilson? And if you do believe it's Garrett Wilson, what do you think this does for Breece Hall in the running game?
Well, just to go straight to Breece Hall, I don't think it affects him at all. The only thing that really affects him is his knee and how soon he can get back on the field. Yeah. I think he's obviously shown that he's going to be a stud no matter who's. I mean, he was doing it with Zach Wilson. So I don't think putting Aaron Rodgers under center really hurts him any. I think Wilson is the obvious answer because they don't really have a lot that's fantasy relevant. I mean, Lazard kind of is what he is. I don't know that Corey Davis is going to be on the team for very long. I kind of thought that he would be part of the deal. And if it was after June 1, when they could kind of split the cap up, then he might be included in the deal. But he's basically redundant with Alan Lazard. They're basically the same players, and he's got, $11 million cap hit, but with no guaranteed money. So he's probably going to get cut. What else do you have other than that? They traded Elijah Moore. They've got Lazard. I would assume Randall Cobb will eventually sign. I think the winner for the Jets is Nathaniel Hackett because this gives him a chance to run his offense with a competent quarterback. I think it's good for Zach Wilson. Rodgers is a guy he respects. I think it gives him time to sit down, to learn, to kind of mature. And that's what he really needs to do. He needs some help mechanically, but more than anything, he needs to mature. So I think being able to sit behind, there's no question he's going to sit behind Hall of Famers. This is a really good thing for him in his career.
Do you think either one of you can chime in on this one? Do we think a team makes a play for Zach Wilson?
No.
I don't think so. I don't think you'd have both enough of a market, and I honestly don't think the Jets are willing to totally give him away for nothing.
That's kind of what I was wondering. So.
Yeah.
I don't think they would sell low on him.
Yeah, I don't think so either. They seem to be rallying around him in the sense that, listen, we know he's not ready. He's very clearly not ready to start, but we'd like to give him a chance to be that long-term guy, maybe sit just behind, see what he go pick up and learn. And, I had Jet fans, which I completely disagree with. I had Jet fans telling me that trading for Rodgers to train Zach Wilson was a good idea. And I'm like, that is not something you want to be counting on. But you do get the sense that the Jets are hoping something works out and aren't really willing to move him from nothing just on that off chance.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, you hope that by seeing how Aaron Rodgers prepares, Zach Wilson is going to improve a little bit. What I found interesting, Joel, you mentioned, Aaron Rodgers down year last year, downside of his career, 64% completion. I went and looked. The Jets had a 59% completion. So that's still 5% better than what the Jets had. And that's a wonderful stat about the 19% uncatchable balls to Garrett Wilson, because Wilson still had a solid season, 83 receptions, 1,100 yards, 4 touchdowns. However, his 56% catch rate for a guy with only a 13.3 yards per catch, those two things don't tend to jive in today's NFL. You would expect a higher catch rate for someone who's not above like 15, 16% yards per catch. So
he was 90th in target accuracy on Player Profile. Like, I mean, it's just something that is, there's not much he could have done better. He was open, he got it done, he was there, just the throws weren't. And you have to imagine that gets fixed with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I think Michael hit on it when he said, he was catching targets from, Mike White, Joe Flacco, and he was significantly better with those guys in the lineup than he was with Zach Wilson. And,
yeah,
as much as Rodgers struggled last year, he's still a huge upgrade over Mike White. It's not even close. So that can't be anything but good for him.
Sorry, Joel. Number 6 in unrealized air yards as well. Whew. Over 837 unrealized air yards.
Is McCole Hardman going to play the slot in this offense in a 3 wide receiver set? Are they going to put Lazard and Wilson on the outside? And is it McCole Hardman, or should we be looking for the Jets to add a more prototypical slot wide receiver still?
I think they'll add competition in the draft. I think we'll see someone get added maybe late day 2, early day 3. But I would expect Mecole to be there, rotate into a bit of a motion role, like, what we've seen from Mecole. We know what he is, but I agree with Joel. I expect Randall Cobb to be signing in the next couple of days.
That makes a lot of sense. Sorry.
Yeah, Randall Cobb will fill the slot. You'll see, I don't know, maybe Josh Downs falls in the draft really far and he becomes a value for the Jets, and he slots into the slot. And you have Mecole there. They just do a bit of a committee with Lazard working on the run block on the one side, Garrett Wilson doing his thing on the other.
Yeah, Lazard can play the big slot, so he can slide in there too.
And then, Joel, with Nathaniel Hackett, you're a Packers fan. You watched a lot of when Rodgers and Hackett were together. Will we see a roughly the same running back target volume that we saw from the Jets last year? Because one of the nice things about the Jets is they did throw to their running backs a lot, but a lot of people wondered if the reason they throw to their running backs a lot is because of how terrible their quarterbacks were. But Rodgers threw the running back quite a bit in Green Bay, at least enough to make Aaron Jones a very valuable PPR asset. So are we expecting, because like last year, Michael Carter, 54 targets, Breece Hall, 31 targets in only 7 games. Should we expect both of those guys to be 40-plus target guys, or do we expect Michael Carter to kind of fall away?
I think Michael Carter just kind of falls away by general attrition, that he's just not as good as Breece Hall. I don't know that he's even as good as like Bam Knight. So I think they like him quite a bit. They gave him a good bit of run after Breece Hall got hurt. I don't think they'll go as much as the Packers did with Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is a very good receiving back. You can split him out wide. So I don't know that he's necessarily comparable with Hall in that way. I think they'll do more than they did last year, but I don't know that they're going to do as much as like the Packers did.
I was going to say, when you look at their overall numbers last year, Michael, they were at 85, just doing quick math here, almost 140 targets or 130 targets to the running back last year, which is a pretty big number in comparison to the rest of the league. But again, most people pointed that as the downfalls of the Jets quarterback. So Joel had mentioned he doesn't think they're going to throw quite as much there. So do we think maybe that we see a step back with Aaron Rodgers more willing to use these wide receivers that he's more comfortable with, Michael?
I think we could almost see a return to not this past year with Rodgers, because we have a long history with Rodgers of having his guy, and he had Devontae Adams. That was his guy. And he had Jordy Nelson. He had great receivers. Last year wasn't. He didn't have that. That was, in my opinion, somewhat of an outlier, a big adjustment of not having Devontae Adams. And I truly believe Garrett Wilson, while he's not Devontae Adams, is going to be an extremely elite receiver throughout his career. And I think we could see that type of target share going to Garrett Wilson. Allen Lazard does what Allen Lazard does. He has his role. He gets some touchdowns there, hit him there. And I completely agree with Joel. I don't think that Breece Hall is as good as a receiving back as Aaron Jones. I think Aaron Jones is criminally underrated in the NFL nowadays. But I also think that we're going to see a lot of those targets because Rodgers has a tendency. We have the same offensive system. Breece Hall is still a really good receiver. I think he is good for a 60 target type of game, 60 target type of year, maybe 40 for Michael Carter mixing in on passing downs. But it, like Joel said, I think most of that mixing in will come early when he's rehabbing a little bit. It'll be Breece Hall's backfield by week 6 even.
And then let's talk about the tight ends before we move on to Green Bay. So you're looking at the Jets tight ends, and last year they signed both Tyler Conklin and CJ Uzama. Both got playing time. Neither was fantasy relevant for the entire season. Conklin had his weeks. It was a very good streaming option for many weeks. You could almost predict it based on matchups and which quarterback was playing. Rodgers' offenses, Hackett's offenses have never heavily targeted the tight end. Michael, I'm going to let you start here, and Joel, I'll let you finish up. They've never heavily targeted the tight end, but we've seen insane touchdown volume. Is there some sleeper potential with either Conklin or Uzama if we know full-fledged who's going to be the starter?
I don't think it's going to be anything that interests me in drafts. I think it's something that will weekly interest me on the stream. When we have those matchups that we know teams allow more touchdowns to the tight end. You have Seattle, Arizona last year, where we knew they were going to catch a touchdown or come close to it. Sure, I'll take the chance on Tyler Conklin or whoever's running the most routes, which probably will be Tyler Conklin. I'll take the chance on that. I mean, we saw, we like you said, we've seen this offense use it, but I really do believe it's going to be touchdown or bust, which means that you're going to have a lot more of those busts than you're going to have touchdowns.
A happy Bears fan for just getting Aaron Rodgers out of the division. Shout out to Gemmo. He's thanking the Jets for getting Aaron Rodgers out of his headache. So Joel, do you agree with that on the tight ends, that these are just streaming options? No one's who's going to sneak themselves into any sort of draft value?
I have zero interest outside of 1 year from Jermichael Finley and an outlier touchdown year from Robert Tonyan. Rodgers' tight ends have never been fantasy relevant in any way whatsoever, and I don't think either of these guys is good enough to be to change that mold. So Rodgers just doesn't like throwing to tight ends. He's never done it, and a lot of that. A lot of the narrative for a while was that it was the McCarthy offense that didn't like throwing to tight ends, and then Matt LaFleur came in and nothing changed.
Still weren't throwing to tight ends.
So what's the common denominator here? It's Aaron Rodgers. I don't think that's going to change. I don't have any fantasy interest in either of those guys outside of maybe a late best wall flyer.
I like it. I'm actually going to throw one more New York Jets question in, since you guys are both dynasty analysts. Where was Garrett Wilson before you knew Aaron Rodgers coming to town, and where is Garrett Wilson now? If you don't do rankings, I understand, but just give me a general idea. Does Aaron Rodgers really even affect Garrett Wilson's dynasty value? Joel?
I don't think it really does, because I think Garrett Wilson's dynasty value is kind of maxed out. He's kind of sitting right around the periphery of the top five, and I don't know that he's really I think he's very good, but I don't know that he's ever someone who's ever going to, challenge for the top, to be top fantasy wide receiver one in any given year. So I think he was kind of at his ceiling. So I don't know that this changes a whole lot dynasty wise.
Michael? It doesn't change anything for me, because I think I've been projecting Aaron Rodgers to eventually find his way to New York for months now. So in that sense that I always expect him to be here, I'm not changing it. And for reference, in a ADP mock that I'm doing right now with IDP guys, Garrett Wilson went at the 204, 1 QB, which is the wide receiver 10. I imagine that's behind Cooper Kupp, that's behind Tyreek Hill, T. Higgins, DK. I would take him ahead of all those names personally.
Behind T. Higgins seems criminal.
It is a bit. I love T. Higgins, but people are too high on T. Higgins.
Yeah.
That's a whole other conversation for maybe Sunday. But Garrett Wilson is a first round startup guy. I think he was borderline that before the trade. I think that's what he is after, because I think he does have wide receiver one overall potential. I think that is in the realm of outcomes, because I think you get a target share that Devontae Adams got. We've seen Aaron Rodgers be willing to target guys that, if they're good enough, we've seen that 28% target share, even higher at times. And I'm not going to say Garrett Wilson can become Devontae Adams immediately. I'm not saying he steps into that. I'm not saying Nathaniel Hackett can be that good, but we've seen it happen before with elite talents, and I do believe Garrett Wilson is in that vein.
All right. Angel? Oh, wait, you already answered. What am I doing? Wait, no, you didn't answer. I started with Michael, didn't I? I don't even know what I'm doing these days.
He answered.
Okay, my apologies,
guys. All good.
So let's move on to the Packers, since I'm clearly losing my mind. So the Packers now go from Aaron Rodgers, a very known commodity, to Jordan Love, who is kind of, no offense with what I'm about to say, but the draft pick of Jordan Love has been a joke for the last few years because nobody knew what the hell the Packers were doing. It didn't seem like the Packers knew what the Packers were doing, but they seem to know what they're doing now, Joel. So I'm going to let you get started because you have been touting Jordan Love this entire offseason, and you were doing it long before that. What should people expect from Jordan Love, the 17-game starter in Green Bay?
Yeah, so I'm one of probably two people on Packers Twitter who was okay with that draft pick, actually liked the draft pick. Literally everyone said, oh, they should have taken T. Higgins. They should have taken T. Higgins. I liked Love as a prospect. I thought the draft pick was correct because given where Rodgers was at that point, and remember, this is coming off 2019 before the back-to-back MVPs, and he struggled in 2019. Yeah. They did well as a team, but he did not play to his normal standard. And I think the reasoning goes when you're consistently picking in the 20s, which that team is and always had and was going to continue to do, for as long as Rodgers was paying at a top level. If you can get a quarterback that you like at that point, you have to take it. You have to, because you're not going to get the opportunity. You're not going to pick in the top 5 where you're going to get a Trevor Lawrence or you're going to get, a Joe Burrow or a Justin Herbert. You're just not. And you're never going to be that bad barring an injury. So if you get to a point where you're in that position and you see a prospect that you like and can develop and can turn into a starter, then it's incumbent on you as the general manager of that team, the steward of that team, to take that player. So I 100% thought Gutekunst did the right thing in that position. Now, what is he going to be? I think I said after week 1 last year when they lost to Minnesota, not saying that he was a better quarterback. I think he was a better fit for that offense than Rodgers ever was. If you look at the way LaFleur wants to play, it's very much like a Shanahan offense. It's a lot under center. It's a lot with a lot of pre-snap motion. They want to run a lot of horizontal route concepts. These are things that are basically antithetical to the way Aaron Rodgers wants to play. Rodgers didn't want to play with tempo. He wanted to play at a glacial pace. He wanted to run the snap count down every time to where they were constantly burning timeouts. That's not the way that offense needs to run. Jordan Love will be a better steward of that offense. He will be basically a point guard quarterback. I don't think he's going to be Joe Burrow. I don't think he's going to be Justin Herbert. But he will run that offense, and he will be he's basically going to be a more athletic Jimmy Garoppolo. So, take that for what you will. Jimmy Garoppolo is a good quarterback. He's gotten to Super Bowls. He's gotten to championship games. So I think he's just a better version of that in that offense. And I think he's going to be fringe top 10, top 12 quarterback, fantasy quarterback. And dynasty wise, I think he should be ranked ahead of Trey Lance. And he should be ranked ahead of, probably 3 of the 4 rookie quarterbacks.
Well, that was the question I was going to throw to you, Michael, just to continue off of what Joel was saying. Is Superflex is a dynasty format where young quarterbacks tend to get overdrafted, and Love really hasn't ever been that. Certainly as the backup, where should we start considering taking Jordan Love in these Superflex dynasty startups?
It's probably, like you said, it's probably going to be later than he should be. And he's been a tremendous value the last few months because, again, if you're reading the very big, large, and I can't pronounce the drugs that Aaron Rodgers uses, but tea leaves that are out there in the Green Bay space right now, it's that Jordan Love was going to be the 2023 starter. And it made sense for that. So he's been a tremendous value for months now. And now your people are going to look at him. He's going to be he is now the confirmed starter, barring a shocking move in the draft. He's probably should be a top 36 pick. He probably should be a 3rd round or higher pick. And I couldn't bring myself to pick him higher than that because I just don't know. And truthfully, if that's what he is, Joel, if he is Jimmy Garoppolo, could work for the offense, could work for everyone around him, might not be the best for fantasy. He's not a runner. That's also got to be baked into that projection. Where I think I'm very interested in Jordan Love is if that happens. If they get Jackson Smith-Njigba, if they get a difference-making wide receiver in this draft, I don't think this roster is built to be that Shanahan yards after catch. I don't think they have the weapons yet. Christian Watson's cool. I wasn't a huge fan, but he played fairly well at the end of. He played very well at the end of last season, and there's that. You have Romeo Doubs, day 3 guy, looked all right, but probably nothing more than a wide receiver 3. You had, your leading receiver in Alan Lazard is now gone. You have to add someone. I think if you add a dynamic guy like JSN, I would be a lot more in on Jordan Love for this year. I don't know how high his fantasy ceiling is. I don't think it's QB1 high, but I do think it's top 15 high.
What does this do for let's just do what we did for the Jets, but I'm going to start the wide receivers were already a question just because they were both rookies. With Alan Lazard gone, it was going to be Doubs and Watson. But Joel, what does this do for Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon? Last year didn't quite go to the script that the fantasy world painted, where we expected Dillon to lead the carries by quite a bit and we expected Jones to lead the targets. Jones led the targets, not quite to the number that the fantasy world was projecting. He finished with 72 targets, but he also out-carried Dillon by about 30 carries. And then Dillon, until he started scoring touchdowns, Dillon was really kind of down for most of the year and probably dropped on a lot of redraft rosters by week 6.
Yeah, I think it's a really good thing for both of them. One, I think you're going to have a quarterback who is going to run the plays that come in from the sideline instead of checking out of them constantly. And we know Aaron Rodgers did that. And if you want to be the offense that they are supposed to be, that they are meant to be, which is, a running centric, because your best players are your 2 running backs. Right? I mean, Christian Watson's in that discussion. And you've got a very good offensive line, run blocking offensive line. You cannot check out of 8-man boxes on run calls every time. You've got to establish that you're going to try and run it. You've got to keep the defense honest, and Rodgers would never do that. So I think they're going to get more opportunities. We talked earlier in the season. AJ Dillon was a lot better running out of the quarterback under center than he was the quarterback under shotgun. And as I said, Rodgers wants to play out of shotgun. He doesn't want to play under center. That's going to be better for him. We've seen when Love has been in games, he has targeted Aaron Jones heavily. So I think it's both from an offensive scheme perspective, they're going to get more touches, which they needed last year. And I think Rodgers kind of took away from them. And I think they're being better situations. Plus, you're going to have Christian Watson for an entire year this year. I mean, he was as good as he was. He really didn't do anything until week 10 when he was fully healthy and really got going. So, and I think that's a big deal. And I agree 100% with Michael. I think the trade, when you talk about the swap, I think that was done so that they can go after JSN.
It seems very deliberate.
That's what they want to do. Because if you think about it, the prime spots for him to go are going to be kind of maybe Tennessee. I think they should be taking a lineman, but and Houston at 12 if they take CJ Stroud. So now you're at 13. You're in position to go up ahead of those 2 teams, and if that's who you want to go get him, and I think he would completely open this offense up.
Before we move, Michael, I want you to talk about the running backs as well. But before we can move on, can we just appreciate the irony, hilarity of trading Aaron Rodgers away and then finally drafting a wide receiver in the first round?
Well, I think there's a reason for that, in that for 30 years, you've had Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, who are 2 guys who have been historically great at making their receivers better. So you didn't need first round receivers. And I think the fact that, they've never taken a first round receiver is kind of overblown. I mean, they took Christian Watson with the 34th pick. That's essentially a first rounder in 2008, or what is Rodgers' first year, 2008. They traded down out of 30 to pick Jordy Nelson at 36 or something like that. So, I mean, they would have taken him.
They were getting high pedigree guys.
So they took Greg Jennings in the 2nd round. So
Devontae Adams was a 2nd rounder, right?
Devontae Adams was a 2nd rounder. Cobb was, I think, a 3rd rounder. So it's not like they haven't spent draft capital on receivers. They have.
All right, Michael, keep going with the running backs though. So Joel thinks you're going to see better volume, and hopefully more passing to Aaron Jones is always a good thing. So
yeah, and I think Joel brought up an incredible point that I remember watching, but honestly didn't totally comprehend until you just brought it up. The runs out of shotgun. So AJ Dillon had a 59% carry rate out of shotgun, which was the 8th highest in the league. Which you look at him, he's not a shotgun carry back. That doesn't really make sense. But he averaged, any guesses on his yards per carry on those runs? Any just guesses?
Out of shotgun?
Out of shotgun, specifically out of shotgun.
Because I know what his yards per carry for the season, I would say something like 3.6.
I would say low
3.6.
threes.
1. He averaged 1 yard per carry out of shotgun, which made up 59% of his, which was 59% shotgun carry rate. This is according to Player Profiler, which I do love their stats. I use their advanced analytics a lot, and it showed. Whenever we watched that, it didn't make sense because he's not crazy fast. He's not getting to the line of scrimmage. He gets hit by someone else, and end of the play. So I do agree that I think there's going to be a lot more cohesiveness in the Green Bay Packers offense this year, that this isn't the Aaron Rodgers show anymore. It'll be the Matt LaFleur show. And, Joe brought up the point of he drafted this guy. This is the guy that the Green Bay wanted to run the offense. It wasn't Aaron Rodgers because Aaron Rodgers does his own thing. So I do think we'll see things how Green Bay always wanted it to be. So it'll be interesting to see the guys that they've drafted the last few years and how they fit into this offense. Because currently in the past, they were drafted to be into Aaron Rodgers' offense by people that wanted it to be in a different system. So it's really going to be such an interesting season. There's not many teams out there that are honestly more like not just interesting, but just such a great story, such a great high and low of what the season could be than the Green Bay Packers in 2023.
Yeah, it's when you look at the roster, outside of running back, it's a lot of question marks, Joel. So talk about the wide receivers. So are we expecting, obviously you guys have brought it up numerous times. The trade up to 13 seems very intentional. It seems like it's probably a JSN move. And does that story just write itself? Is it then Watson, Dubs, and JSN starting right away, right off the rip?
Yeah, this offense needs a slot. More than anything, right?
Yeah.
Watson's he's basically a boundary X. Dubs he's not Devontae Adams, but he's stylistically similar to Devontae Adams. And both those guys, he brought up with Watson, both those guys, they missed a lot of time with injuries in their first year. I think Watson particularly needs an offseason in an NFL weight room. And if you think about it, when these rookies come into the league, they've got a bowl game. They probably got, they've got to prep for the Senior Bowl. Then they got to prep for the Combine. Then they've got OTAs. When do you have time to get, to get in a weight room and build yourself up and get ready for an NFL level season? They don't know what an NFL level season is. I think a year in the weight room is going to do him wonders. I think he's going to be he's going to have huge breakout potential if he can just stay healthy. And so, yeah, I think Dubs has a chance to make a second year leap. Assuming they can get someone in the slot to kind of open him up on the outside. I think he can be a very capable Z. So I think that they've got building blocks. They need more, obviously. They've really only got two guys. Samori Toure was a 7th rounder, showed a little bit, but not something you can count on. Yeah, they definitely need. And if you look at this draft, there's a lot of slot guys, but there's not a lot of big guys, outside of Quentin Johnson, maybe Cedric Tillman. So and I think they definitely want to. JSN's the best receiver in this class by a mile, so I think that's definitely their target, and I think it would do wonders for this offense.
Michael, I'm going to have you keep talking about the wide receivers, and Joel, I'm going to come back to you with the question I'm about to ask Michael, but let's assume it's not JSN at 13, not necessarily at 13. What other wide receivers fit what you guys would like to see in Green Bay, starting with you, Michael, but you can also talk about Watson and Dubs.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll touch on with Watson, I honestly like Dubs a little bit more than Watson last year as prospects. Call me crazy. Wasn't a fan of Watson at North Dakota, but Watson did have a knee injury last summer. He didn't miss a lot of time in camp. He started training camp on the pup because of it. So it's a raw prospect that missed the summer and then missed the start of the year, missed more time into the year, that then broke down the back half of it. So that arc of not getting that time and should have the time this summer, it could project better for him going forward, especially a guy with such a high ceiling because he's a freak athlete. The ceiling is incredibly high for Christian Watson. But other receivers that could fit, I guess Zay Flowers, but 13 is way too rich for me. I like Jordan.
Yeah, no,
Adams.
let's not. Yeah, let's assume they figure out a way to get one of these guys later. Maybe they fall back from 13. That doesn't seem likely. But I don't know. But yeah.
So we're saying looking at the second round, or
let's talk about second, third round guys.
Yeah. Well, now they have the extra pick from the Jets, so there's a lot of options they could really go with. I do think Zay Flowers is not going to be a day one guy. I think Zay Flowers slips outside of day one. I do think he'd be a great fit. with the Packers in terms of what he can do after the catch, what he can do from the slot. That makes a lot of sense to me. He reminds me a lot of Tyler Lockett. And I think that's something that could work really well. I like Josh Downs more than the average person as well. Out of UNC, smaller guy, but again, would work really well in the slot. I like Paris Campbell, so that's kind of maybe there's something telling with me liking Josh Downs, but I think there's a lot of guys that can kind of fit into the slot role. And if they want the slot to be a, just fine, there's so many guys that can play the slot and be just fine. But if they want to go for something special, there's JSN. I think Zay Flowers has that ceiling. And I do think Josh Downs has that ceiling as well. Not JSN's ceiling, but yeah.
I get, Joel, same guys for you. Is there anybody else you need to add to the list? Or?
Yeah, I think if you go down farther into the third round, then you're talking about guys like Tank Dell, something like that. I'm kind of the opinion, I've kind of come around to the fact I think that the Packers are going to trade the third rounder for Budda Baker. They desperately need a safety. They've opened up some cap space, moving Rodgers. Let's be perfectly honest. Gutekunst has failed miserably with every single one of his third rounders, every single one. So they should be looking to trade that pick. Yeah. Amari Rodgers instead of Amon-Ra St. Brown. Let's not go there. So I think that's the way they're going to go. So I think they're going to take a receiver with one of their two picks. I think they're probably going to take a tight end with one of their picks as well, because they have literally nothing. Like the dream scenario for me is to get Amon-Ra or JSN and Darnell Washington.
I was going to say, I bet Amon-Ra St. Brown is the dream scenario.
Yeah, well, that would be too. If Gutekunst hadn't screwed that up, then they wouldn't need a slot receiver right now.
Yeah.
They basically, when you talk about Darnell Washington, they basically employed Mercedes Lewis to do something that Washington is basically 50 times better than. Well past Lewis's expiration date for the past 3-4 years that he's been there. So I think he would just slot in there perfectly, into that sixth offensive lineman who doesn't need to report as eligible, kind of freakish athlete, pass catcher, and a guy who's going to develop, who's going to be a better pro than he was even in college. He never really got the chance at Georgia with Brock Bowers there. So I think there's development with him. And I think there's kind of growing into his body as well, and just learning how to use his body and
it's a hell of a body to grow into.
Coordinate himself. Yeah, exactly.
I love everything you just said there, Joel, by the way, especially from the IDP side. I'm not going to touch on it too long because that's not what this is about. But Budda Baker in Green Bay, that makes so much sense and would just be an excellent fit. I'd love that so much.
Well, on the mock draft show today, we had Fantasy Jay on from one of his many gigs is at Fantasy and Frames, and he was talking about Stacey Perez had brought up that Darnell, I'm sorry, I just blanked on his name, Darnell Washington. Yeah, well, blanked for a second there. His hands are 11 inches long. Like she held up a piece of standard paper. That's Darnell Washington's hand, for Christ's sake. And my goodness. But Joel, wonderful mind reading, because I was literally going to end the show with, the Packers have a hole at tight end. Who should they fill it with out of this very tight end rich draft? Joel wants to start on Washington. Michael, who do you think they should fill it with?
I mean, Darnell Washington makes a ton of sense for what they want to do in the run game and what they can do with him in the passing game is the ceiling that he has as an athlete and with that frame. And again, like Joel said, Brock Bowers is certifiably him and will be a top 10 draft pick next year. So it makes sense that Washington just didn't get that opportunity. But if I had to throw out another name, Sam Laporta, maybe. If Dalton Kincaid slides, I think both those guys would be good fit. It says receivers, and if they don't go wide receiver, maybe they want to add a guy with some more receiving upside or a higher receiving floor, I should say, than Darnell Washington, where he could just be an inline blocker, and that could just be all he is. But yeah, I mean, those are the names that stand out to me. It's really such a question mark on where the tight ends are going to go because it's such a deep class, but there is talent. There's a lot of talent in this group. I in my mock that I released today, I do have two. I have Michael Mayer and I have Dalton Kincaid in the first round. And my hesitation with doing that, even though I did put it down, is just teams could wait. We can name 6 tight ends in this class that could be, starting caliber tight ends down the line. And that doesn't happen too often. In most classes, there's 1, 2, maybe, and we've had some with none. So,
I was going to say, when you just look back to last precisely what I was going to say. Last year we had Trey McBride, who was the best tight end and fell to the 3rd round. So
there were guys that were like, okay, he's probably our tight end too, and then didn't get drafted. Like there's what's it called? Thaddeus Moss from a few years ago. I don't know. Like guys that we always project to be nice upside guys, and then they always take time, and then they just don't work out. So there's there's guys that are just going to be good projects to be building around, and it's such a good class to get if you needed tight end. I know the Steelers spoke today. Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan, the GM, was asked about what positions are deep in this year's class, and Omar Khan's listing them off, and Mike Tomlin jumps in and says tight end. And I think, if you don't trust the word of myself, of Joel or Ryan here, trust it from Mike Tomlin.
Yeah, Gutekunst said the same thing at the combine too.
Yeah,
that was one of the, he said basically edge rusher and tight end were the two strongest positions in this draft.
And we had Jeff Bell on the Wednesday show this past week, and he hit on what you both have kind of hit on, is it's so deep, but you have that weird balance of when does a team say, well, I don't care how deep it is, I want Michael Mayer, I want Dalton Kincaid, versus, well, I have this guy kind of close, so I'm just going to wait and wait and wait, to where it could be a great thing, it could be a terrible thing for these tight ends, to where we'd have no idea how many are going to end up going in the 1st round. So it's an interesting dynamic, and Thursday can't get here fast enough. I'm going to give each of you guys just a little bit of time before we wrap up the show. Anything about this trade that we didn't get a chance to talk about today? Michael, I'll let you go first. Joel, I'll let you get us out of the show. So Michael, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trade that had to be done. It's a trade that the Jets needed to make, and it's a trade the Packers did a good job of getting all they could out of it. So I think it's a trade that makes a lot of sense for both sides, and ultimately, it sets them both up for what they want to be. The Jets want to be a contender in 2023. The Packers want to be kickstarting this rebuild, seeing what they have in Jordan Love, excuse me. And
the IDP guy kicking through.
It's a huge issue, honestly. You have no idea how many times I've done that off the air in my room. But yeah, it's just something that they're going to have to make a decision on Jordan Love soon. This contract doesn't last forever. They drafted him some time ago. This is the time you see what you have in them. If you correct me if I'm wrong, but the 5th-year option will be eligible to be picked up next year.
Yeah, it's at the end of this season. Year. They needed to know.
Yeah, they have to decide on it this year. Yep.
Exactly. So this is it. You have to see what you have in them. You're surrounded by weapons. There's a lot to like here. We don't know. And it's going to be so interesting to watch, man.
Yeah, it's a great point on the timing. Joel?
Yeah, I think following up on what Michael said, I think, we talk in the fantasy realm that we have to listen to the NFL. And we talk about draft compensation, stuff like that. We have to listen to what the NFL thinks. Green Bay is telling us they believe in Jordan Love. They would not make this move if they didn't. They would, this is a very conservative franchise. They would very much stick with Rodgers. They would stick with Rodgers if they didn't think they had an answer behind him. So I think they believe in him, and I think they have reason to. The contract is up. This is the end of his rookie deal. This will be his 4th year, so they have to declare his 5th-year option. I kind of wonder if they just forego that, and they may. We'll see. We'll see if they put their money where their mouth is, and if they just go ahead and sign him to an extension. Kind of do the baseball thing and sign him before he gets on the field, and just say, we believe in this guy, and we're going to try and get him at maybe a below market contract.
I was just going to say that could end up being the more productive, marketable deal for them. So
yeah, if you give him his 5th year, then you're basically locking him in at $20 million next year. If you sign him to a longer term, then you could probably get his cap number down to about half that, or some percentage of that. So I think that's something that's in play if they really believe in him, and I think they wouldn't make this move if they didn't. So.
Well, there you have it. Before I wrap us up, guys, talk about the Dynasty Show. I know you guys have been working on a lot. I saw that the first run of the show sheet is starting to materialize. So I'm excited. Do we have a date yet? Is there any details you guys can share with everybody about the Dynasty Show?
I believe we're aiming for Sunday, this very Sunday coming up. We got, listen, this is the week for Dynasty. We have been waiting.
Oh, shit, that's a perfect day.
A month and a half. We have been waiting forever, Joel and I, for the draft. It's been nothing. We had free agency, and that was like a fun 5 days. Yeah. And now we're getting news of just negative stuff, injuries. Guys, maybe they're going to be back. Maybe they're not. And we don't care because it's not going to matter until September. So all this stuff, and we just get to kick it off Sunday. So be sure to tune in for that. I'm not sure if we settled on a time, but it's the Dynasty after party. So we'll get it kicking off in the afternoon.
I say you can make the time irrelevant if you just go ahead and click the subscribe button right now, and then you'll get notifications every time we go live. And let me give you a hint. This week, it's going to be a lot. So tomorrow night, we have our golf show, and I think that kicks off at 8:30. That's with Kelly and Adam. Then Wednesday, we are doing our first round mock draft, where we are going to have 5 of our friends on from the industry, along with myself and Josh. And we are going to mock out the entire first round. We were all assigned teams. This was before the trade, but it turns out Joel had both the teams involved in the trade, so he'll be able to get that all figured out. But we're going to talk about our picks and why they matter and why they're not going to actually happen, because then Thursday, we are doing a live stream of the first round. We're going to have guests on all night. I believe both of you are going to be there for long periods of time because you're our Dynasty people. And why wouldn't you be? And then on Sunday, the Dynasty after party. So guys, we have a ton going on. Make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube page. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Michael. Make sure you follow on these guys. They both have their Twitter handles in their description. I don't care if you follow me or not. I'm just hosting. But if you want Dynasty information, you want to follow these guys. Plain and simple. Thank you so much for joining us. Always remember, defense wins championships. Offense wins fantasy football. We will see you on Wednesday for the first round.